and welcome to Adventures in Local Marketing from BrightLocal, the marketing podcast for marketers who want to do good local SEO. In the upcoming episodes, I'll be chatting with a smorgasbord of marketers who each bring their unique insight into the local marketing landscape. And each episode is going to be a one-stop overview of our guest's chosen topic area, and it's going to give you tips and tactics that you'll be able to dash off and implement right away, as well as offer insight that will get your brain cogs whirring. So I'm your host, Claire Carlile, and I'm BrightLocal's local search expert, as well as a chartered marketer with 20 years of experience working with local businesses of all shapes and sizes. And today, we are going to be chatting with the brilliant and lovely David Mihm. So David has spent his career helping location-oriented companies make the most of their digital presence. And over the course of the 2010s, his teams built software products to optimize what are now Google business profiles and other directory listings. First, he was the co-founder and CEO of getlisted.org, and then he was at Moz, and then he was finally as VP at ThriveHive. And David was also a co-founder of the local university and the creator of the original local search ranking factors survey from 2008 to 2016 before he handed it over to Darren Shaw. So David started his career in the mid-2000s as a consultant and is now back at that mode of work. So he's teamed up with Mike Blumenthal and Greg Sterling at Near Media to help multi-location brands and vertical agencies understand how their customers interact with the Google search results, and they advise them on how to adjust their search strategy accordingly. Hello, David, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Claire. Thank you for the invitation, and it's really great to be here. I noticed your list of guests so far has been nothing short of superlative, so I'm honored to be included in that set of guests.
You're in our top one, quite frankly, so it is a delight to have you here today. Thank you very much for giving up your time. So today we are going to be talking about Google Business Profile and some of the key frustrations for enterprise organizations and businesses with multiple locations in terms of managing and optimizing their listings. And you, my dear friend David, have got a ton of experience in this area. And I must say that on your website, a former client of yours describes you as one of a small handful of people in the world with both the tactical in the trenches knowledge and strategic worldview to address enterprise local search presence effectively. Is that fair?
It's a very nice comment, and I would say thank you for being the one person, according to analytics, that read my website this month. That's great.
I've been poring over it. It's brilliant.
It's a really nice comment. I do think that is a sort of differentiator, as I think a lot of, especially if you're hiring an agency as a brand, you're likely to get a senior level person sort of during the pitch process and during the setup, and then essentially a junior level person just due to the dynamics of running an agency for most of the engagement. And I think that's not just for myself, but for essentially if you're hiring any sort of solo or small team of consultants, that is a benefit to going a little bit smaller with your outsourced team.
Yeah, definitely. So you've been involved in local search for, I think it's a gazillion years.
Gazillion being maybe like not quite 20, but just approaching 20 this year, which is pretty crazy. Yeah.
Basically the same, gazillion, 20. So you've seen a lot of changes, changes come, changes go. So I am really keen to find out more about how you are experiencing the current state of Google Business Profile for enterprise. So on that theme, can you tell me about the changes that you have seen in terms of managing multiple locations inside of Google Business Profile? Like, where did we start and where are we now?
Sure. So, I mean, we started in a place back in, 2009 or something like that, where there really even wasn't a bulk listing management interface inside the old Google local business center, right? It was sort of just a list of locations that you just sort of clicked into and managed each of them individually. I can remember even, I think, as early as 2005 being in there and seeing kind of that kind of setup. And largely that piece of the product hasn't really changed, as crazy as it is to say, almost 20 years later. But I do think that there's sort of been a flow and now an ebb of investment on Google's part in Google Business Profiles, the back end as a product. I think that there's been continuous flow into what consumers see on Google Business Profiles and the amount of sort of interactive features and depth of information that Google is presenting to consumers about a business. But I think that there's been a significant pullback in the internal resources that Google is devoting to Google Business Profiles as a back-end product. And certainly the announcement, I think now it's been about 2 years plus or minus since Google announced that they were sort of deprecating the SMB management app, the dedicated app to manage Google Business Profiles. And I think at the same time, they more or less contemporaneously shifted the interface into what is, I don't know if it's still called NMX because it's no longer new, but like the InSERP editing experience. And you and I have a difference of opinion on how good or bad the NMX interface is, but I think we would likely agree that it is dreadful to unusable for enterprise companies to try to manage information. It's very cumbersome to find exactly the right spot in a profile that you're trying to manage, you're trying to update information for. Changes rarely go through properly the first time, at least in my experience. And if you're trying to manage a bunch of, let's say I'm trying to update the hours for 20 profiles at the same time, and I don't want to deal with trying to form 20 locations, and I don't want to deal with trying to format the hours column in the Google spreadsheet exactly right to update that via bulk interface. It should be faster to do that for that number of profiles, via a single location edit. And if you try to open 20 tabs, as you might want to do if you're trying to be efficient with your time, you actually get a CAPTCHA from Google saying, are you a real human being, opening up all of these individual google.com search URLs, which of course never used to happen back in the sort of pre-NMX days where all of this was handled inside the dashboard itself. In fact, there were discrete URLs that if you were tracking your Google location ID in something like a Google Sheet or even an Excel spreadsheet offline, you could populate the URLs that you were trying to edit directly from that management sheet. And so it was much, much easier to edit directly inside the GBP sort of bulk dashboard. Now, I think we're in this weird spot where Google Business Profiles is still a free product, free for businesses to use. The information that Google is asking for is largely structured data. I think that there's some free-form stuff like, from the business owner. And of course, you can now do posts, which maybe we'll get into that. Like what's the future of posts now that we have social profiles? There's a few free-form things, but it's mostly structured data. And it should be very easy to manage this via spreadsheet. But the product itself has gotten so unusable for an enterprise user on the back end that you kind of now need to pay for a listing service, even though, in my opinion, the value of listing services isn't what it used to be, given the sort of centrality and primacy of Google Business Profiles in the sort of consumer search experience. So it's this very weird paradox of this free product delivering incredible value. I think enterprises in particular still don't understand, by and large, the number of eyeballs that Google Business Profiles are driving, the number of direct actions, whether it's, if you're a retail business, in-store visits or phone calls, if you're an e-commerce business or sort of hybrid business, products now, the local inventory ads that sort of hang off of the Merchant Center Google Business Profile combination. So there's just like an incredible amount of value that Google Business Profiles can and should be driving for enterprises. And yet it's more and more difficult to actually manage the information or let alone optimize the information that you're trying to get Google to display for your businesses.
So we've seen things come, things go. we can no longer, access all of our listings via the dashboard, or at least edit within the old dashboard. In an ideal world, what do you, because you talked about how when things started that wasn't ideal. We finished on you talking about how the current setup really is far from ideal. So if we were building out ourselves, obviously it would be awesome. But what do you think what would it look like? What would it have?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, I want to say, like I mentioned, a few minutes ago, I do think it's, given the sort of downward pressure on prices per location for most listing services these days, I'm not here to endorse or suppress endorsement for any particular service. Could be BrightLocal, WhiteSpark, Uberall, it doesn't matter. But given the sort of downward pressure on prices, like I do think a UI that is actually supported by a real product team and is fit for purpose of managing locations, like is a quantum leap forward over what Google offers natively. That said, I think that many of them have, even at least the ones that I've demoed, and I'm not going to speak to any of the three specifically, but just as a group, I do think that they're actually somewhat more complicated than they need to be. I actually think a spreadsheet is really the most effective way to manage most of this stuff. And in particular, a spreadsheet that shows location sort of change history, where you can identify, a Google user suggested that the hours change on Tuesday of last week, and you can go in and say on Friday of that week, like, okay, no, these are wrong. Here's what we're gonna update. So I think a spreadsheet kind of model which is sort of geared around notifications and the ability to sort of approve or disapprove certain things that got suggested, I think is really kind of where we are today. I think would probably be the most useful interface. That's another thing that's broken. You absolutely cannot disapprove Google suggested edits in bulk inside the dashboard. There are just constant errors with that process. So it is an absolute nightmare to try to stay on top of, in particular, user suggested edits that are generally incorrect in my experience.
I love that. So it's almost like when you talk about the spreadsheet, it is essentially what bulk upload should be if it wasn't so difficult to format.
Yeah. Correct.
And you didn't have so many errors because they've made the process of how everything needs to be formatted so difficult. Then with this additional functionality around monitoring these third-party changes and having some sort of time date stamped, because if you're doing bulk, the only way that you can see what existed before is if obviously you keep a dated version of whatever it is that you've downloaded and uploaded, and it's like
exactly
too many
spreadsheets. The version control is an absolute nightmare, right? So
yeah.
Something like connect this Google Sheet to your Google Business Profiles account would be a much simpler and I think easier for Google to maintain if they're trying to cut back on product resource expenses. Much better implementation than what they've got today. So
exactly, and they do it already. I run a CSV upload for Merchant Center. That populates Merchant Center for some of my customers, and it's just a spreadsheet. So if it can work in Merchant Center, I don't know why it can't work with Google Business Profile. So different organizations of different sizes and different verticals, different niches, different countries, they're all going to have, I imagine, a different understanding of the importance of managing their Google Business Profile. I'm just really interested to maybe get some little vignettes or some ideas from you about how that varies, and if it might be according to business size or industry niche, or just love to hear a little bit of your experiences of managing people's understanding.
Yeah, well, I think that those are, first of all, it's a really interesting question. And secondly, I think that the vectors that you brought up are really interesting sort of paths to consider. I think actually there's this sort of bell curve of understanding the importance of GBP generally, where you have very small businesses probably don't get just how dominant GBP is for sort of, if they're sort of just getting started with a home services business or a small retail store or whatever. Like, I do think we've seen a shift in businesses understanding that that's one of the first steps they do with their online marketing. I had this concept of the local marketing stack for a long time. And, Google business profiles have moved for me, even for me as a marketer who's been in the space a long time, like further and further towards the front of that stack. Like basically, as soon as you have your brand and your name, address, and phone number and a photo, you should probably create a Google business profile. And that didn't used to be quite as important as it is today. And I do think we're seeing more businesses at the very small size kind of understand that this is something I should be doing. But I don't know that they're really aware of just how frequently that's going to show up. And in particular, one of the few things you're going to rank for as a brand new business just starting out is your own business name, and the importance of making a really great first impression. My colleague at Near Media, Mike Blumenthal, has been on this forever, that Google is your new homepage. Not new anymore. He said this like 10 years ago. But essentially, Google is the front door to your business. And I do think that there's still not a full understanding of just how important that first impression is, even for businesses that are very small. You go to the far end of the company size spectrum, to the enterprise side, and I think that they've got, largely enterprises, at least the ones that I've talked to and even worked with, they have maybe an SEO team even, particularly for larger, more commercial focused enterprises. They've got an SEO team. They've got multiple levels of VPs. You probably have a paid side and you have an organic side, and still local tends to fall in the gap, right? Like, the importance of GBPs for localized inventory, absolutely essential, as you were just talking about with the Merchant Center integration. The number of extra opportunities that you have to capture a searcher who is looking to buy something at a physical store with your Google business profiles from a quote unquote organic perspective is huge. And yet there doesn't tend to be a team that's dedicated to local. And I think that this actually, if I recall, the recent BrightLocal sort of enterprise survey that came out, like, there was a feeling that, I'm not even sure that my team sort of has an awareness of local search, but they don't necessarily have this deep disciplinary knowledge specific to local, right? It tended to be more sort of organic, on-page content, that kind of stuff, all of which, of course, helps your business profiles rank better. But there's this sort of gap. And I think that if the VPs or SVPs or CMOs at those organizations truly understood the millions of eyeballs that GBPs are garnering, and potentially the lost dollars that are coming in from bad photos, poor review profiles, unanswered Q&A, right? All of these very basic things. If they understood the opportunity cost of not managing that stuff well, I think that they might sort of maybe shift the team structure a little bit. So I think really then going back to that bell curve, I think that really the best positioned businesses are the ones that are, medium-sized, multi-location organizations where it's like, okay, we're big enough to have a process to manage this stuff. We understand how important it is. We probably don't have the size of the advertising budget to sort of paper over our GBP problems that a larger enterprise might. So I think size-wise, that's probably kind of the sweet spot for companies that understand the value of GBP. And in terms of industries, I think, this is sort of across the board. I work with a lot of healthcare organizations, and I think that my clients at these organizations very much understand the centrality of having good profiles for their physicians, right? Because even if somebody's getting referred to a given a doctor or a clinic, they're going to look it up, and you want somebody to have a good impression to sort of confirm that referral. So the people at my organizations that I work with understand that, but institutionally, I think it's still like SEO is still like so far out of their day-to-day realm of what they're doing in their business that it's not top of mind the way it probably should be in healthcare. So I think that's as an industry, I'm not sure I would put healthcare at the top of the list. I think the more direct response industries that, just for example, like home services, like pest control, basically anything where Google has introduced LSAs, I would say are probably the industries that get the importance of GBP because they've either seen their calls completely dry up with a lacking or poor GBP, or they've absolutely hit it out of the park with great PAC rankings, great local finder rankings. They're probably participating in LSA programs. They understand just how central local search is to their overall business health.
I love that idea of the sweet spot being in that middle area where they don't have this massive budget to throw at advertising. And so they're just like, we really need to get value for money out of, what is free, but it's not free because they need internal resource to really make the most. That's really good. I haven't thought of it like that before. Those are definitely the organizations that I want to work with then.
Exactly. Me too.
Just touching on something that I have been chatting with you a little bit about recently, where you have been helping me with the joys of...
I know where this is going.
Of bulk verification. So just something, it's not something that I've had a massive amount of experience in. It seemed like quite a straightforward process. I understand, I'm in the Google business community. I understand what a profile needs to have to be eligible. So I just thought, this is really straightforward. So we bang, bang, bang. We'll just make sure this is eligible. We'll just upload everything and then we can just send it off. Wow. And then everything will be verified. So it hasn't really worked out like that. It's been a little bit more challenging. So I wondered if you would just give us a bit of an overview about what bulk verification is, who it's for, and why people might need it, and then maybe some top tips.
Sure. So bulk verification is, I think, primarily intended for single domain brands who are managing locations that are largely named the same way, even if they're not quite identical. You might have an LLC in the US and an LTD in the UK or whatever. There's going to be slight variations probably, but generally they're all part of the same recognizable brand and the locations are all named largely the same way. I think Google, the bulk verification process is really set up for that type of client. Google doesn't have clients, but that type of company, organization. It's still not particularly well set up for agencies to be the ones initiating the bulk verification, right? It's fairly easy to add an agency rep as a manager once you're verified. Not easy for the agency rep to actually do this on behalf of a client. I think that's generally speaking what the system is kind of designed to do. I will say, so I've probably helped, I don't know, between a half dozen and a dozen clients get bulk verified over the years, starting as early as 2009 or 10, whenever they first rolled out this option. And I would say that it's largely that the quality of the bulk verification experience has largely paralleled the direct correlation with the amount of product investment Google has put into GBP. I think starting a couple of years ago, so two things happened. First of all, I think spam finally sort of reached a level inside of Google where they started to pay attention to how bad actors were manipulating the bulk verification system. So I think that's number one. Number two, they cut back on product resources more or less simultaneously. And so those two things have combined to make it much more difficult over the last, I don't know, call it year and a half or so. That said, about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, 10 months, I did help one of my enterprise clients get bulk verified. Went right through. We followed all the best practices. Google account that uses the domain name. Things all had the company's brand name at the front with the flavor of service they were offering afterwards. That sort of thing. It was all that all went fairly seamlessly. However, there were a couple of unique locations there. This was a healthcare client. There were a couple of unique locations. We were submitting Google categories, nothing crazy. 2 or 3 categories were summarily rejected. None of those locations were approved as part of our bulk verification, even though, I don't even know, 200 and some clinics went right through, and 10 of them were sort of set over here on the side. Immediately, as soon as we got verified, they were unverified right away. But generally, that kind of went through okay. I've tried to help another organization get bulk verified in healthcare as well. Just in the last couple of months, loads of problems. Verified, unverified, try to claim listings. Those listings aren't verified. They require video verification. Again, this is maybe like a sensitive category somehow for Google. They're not. They're patient-facing, healthcare clinics, but they're all in the same domain. There's a location page for each of them. It's very, very strange. in terms of what Google will accept and what they won't these days. And I know that you've had similar struggles with clients. Yours are sort of adding the additional layer of being in multiple international markets, right? So there may be some weirdness there where Google wants everything in the same country for whatever reason. But I don't know. It feels to me like the entire verification system has gotten much more stringent about kind of what gets in. And at the same time, I don't think they understand, which is great from an individual listing standpoint. I totally support that. But I don't think they understand that enterprises don't really have the capability of sourcing an employee to go and take a video, on their way into work, and then give them temporary access to the account so they can actually get that video into GBP, at exactly the right time, and then, remove the access once the video is uploaded, like all this stuff. Like, this is not a process that exists in any enterprise, at least in the United States, in particular in healthcare enterprises where, the physicians that you're trying to verify as providers, that Google in the past has asked, oh, well, can you show their name on the door of their office? It's like, well, they're practicing at a hospital. Like, they don't really have an office inside the hospital. They're seeing patients there. So it's just, there's a lot of, I think there's just a lot of nuance to how bulk verification should work that the Google product team, doesn't really understand at a deep enough level to make this process work, I think, the way that it should.
I'm wondering, when you like apply, or however it is that you sort of go for that triggering of bulk verification, do you think, is there a specific team that deal with that, or is it just like a generalist support team? Because
it feels like generalist support to me, based on the emails that have come back, right? There certainly isn't any, to me, it doesn't feel like there's any kind of prioritization of who gets bulk verified, right? I mean, we're talking about this recent example is a $1 billion+ healthcare organization with multiple hospitals, hundreds of clinics. You would think that would be something where Google would absolutely want the most accurate information they could get displaying to consumers. And, we're still getting a typical standard response from a normal Google CSR is what it feels like. So
you really do need a degree in being a patient person to sort of navigate all of these different, it's just like, no, this isn't going to get done quickly, and it is likely that there will be 6 million emails back and forth. Yeah. But all we can do is do our best within this.
That's right. Well, and to your point, though, it's like, it's not even something that clients want to pay for, right? It's not like something where you're really delivering a ton of perceived value by helping a client with this process. It's just something that should work and doesn't. And so it's not a pleasant experience for the client. It's not a pleasant experience for the agency or the consultant. And frankly, I think it's probably wasting Google person hours in terms of dealing with all the back and forth. So
yeah, definitely. So yeah, proceed with caution, everyone. Whether if you're trying to go for bulk verification.
If anybody has any tips, share them with me on LinkedIn. I would love to read them.
Yes, please. # bulk verification tips. Thank you very much. We'd love to hear them. So let's take a little bit of a sidestep into sort of management processes and how they might exist within the organization. So thinking a little bit about what you feel is the right balance between sort of centralized management of locations and then the geographic area management of locations. How have you seen that working or addressed most effectively?
Yeah, I think the best way to do this is I absolutely believe that locations should be centrally owned, right? That the owner of this account should be a bulk verified digital marketing director or something at headquarters, corporate headquarters. But I guess I'm very much in favor of delegating access to individual profiles to location-specific representatives at those locations. I think that's really how you're going to get the kind of organic content, not necessarily organic. I don't mean that in terms of organic search, but sort of naturally generated, authentic content at the local level. And of course, it would be great if your location management system had some sort of approval process in place. I don't know if BrightLocals does, or Whitesparks, or Uberalls, or any of the ones that I mentioned. I don't know if they do, but some sort of tiered approval process where there is some sort of, you would post in the location manager that gets some sort of approval from corporate headquarters, and then it goes live on the GBP. But I think, especially given what I said about there typically isn't a dedicated local SEO team or a GBP team inside of a large organization that has the time to dedicate, that they really should be dedicating to each individual profile. I think it's something that you have to try to incentivize, is a very bad word in local these days, but you have to sort of exhort your on the ground folks to really help you do marketing on behalf of their specific location.
Have you seen anything interesting with regard to how these sort of bigger organizations work on delivering training to the people on the ground in terms of how things should work, how to respond to reviews, the type of content that's what's a really good model for delivering that type of training?
You sort of have two levels of training that you'd like to do, right? The first is kind of a, hey, here's the sort of importance to our customers or our consumers of this thing called Google Business Profiles. And here's all the things that your team is doing behind the scenes to help, improve that. And here's some analytics about how much business these things are generating for us. Like, you sort of need the sort of story level, right? And I think that should go to a huge swath of most companies in terms of who that kind of knowledge applies to. And then you have the very detailed tactical stuff of, okay, what's our process if we get a bad review? Do we have an automated response? Does everything get funneled to a human being who's looking at that before they actually respond? Like, all of those kinds of things are really sort of tactical process stuff. And I think that that's a much smaller set of people. I honestly, I've not seen sort of the perfect client yet that's doing both of those things well. I do think it's a great opportunity for vendors to kind of step in and be those experts. A lot of times a third-party voice actually carries more weight. As weird as that sounds, a third-party voice can actually carry more weight than somebody who works for the organization themselves. And so bringing in a third-party expert, like a vendor like yourself, perhaps, to be that expert voice, I think might be a good way for a lot of these multi-location brands to go. Certainly for that sort of high level, this is the importance to consumers for the wider set of the organization.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I love that sort of tie-in with that. That could be. It's like if someone's using a platform, then that's a really good tie-in. We've got loads of resources about how to do things, but pulling that together. I think one of the most effective ones that I've seen was from for a home care franchise. So every franchisee, then when they onboarded, there were all of these courses that had been produced about, right, we do this bit, but you do this bit. This is the Google Business Profile. Here are ideas for how to go and get local backlinks. So that was probably the best thing that I've seen in terms of training. I don't feel like we've had enough ranting, so we're going to go to Room 404, which is a segment where we look at something which is a little bit like your bugbear. So it might be a phrase, it might be a topic, it doesn't just have to be around what we've been talking about, but is there anything that you just want to put in the bin and never see again?
The concept that that has a concept that's been bothering me quite a bit over the last several years is the misconception that schema.org directly drives improved rankings. I don't think that it does. I don't think Google has ever said that it does. Not that we should trust anything Google says these days, but I think that there's this schema is something that is very tangible. It's a tangible deliverable for an agency or even an internal team to say, look, we implemented schema on your pages, and now when you do this particular kind of search, you can see the visual proof of that exercise in the search result, right? To me, I think that schema is that a particular kind of schema, reviews. If you're a large enough organization, you can probably get away with location and practitioner reviews actually getting stars using the correct schema of local review schema. If you want to cheat a little bit, you can still get the review stars using the product schema, misapplying the product schema on whatever page you want to. Google does not seem to be very good about policing that. So that I do think would indirectly drive rankings, because we have seen in our consumer research for near media, consumers are really gravitate towards those gold stars, in particular if they appear on a page that doesn't have many or any gold stars in the organic results. So in that from that very narrow view, implementing review schema can definitely increase click-through traffic, in my opinion. And we know now, thankfully, something that's I've said for years, that an antitrust trial had to drag out of Google. We know now how important clicks are within the algorithm. And so I do think that the increased clicks that you can get from implementing review schema can drive better rankings. That said, across the board, I don't think schema is all that effective at driving an increase in click-throughs. In certain cases, you might be able to get FAQ schema that takes up a larger chunk of the page. Again, our near media consumer research, we have not seen that drive an increase in click-through rates. Whatever marking up your address in local business schema. I mean, frankly, if you've got your address in the footer in the same spot of every page, Google's probably smart enough at this point to figure out where you're located, what you're called, what your phone number is, and match that to your GBP. So most schemas, I don't think, are in local anyway, are that useful for driving rankings, with the exception of review schema.
Tell us, what are you advising your clients about SGE? Is the sky falling down, or is it not?
So this is a great tie-in to a conversation I had yesterday with one of my clients, as well as what we were just talking about with schema. So my general take on SGE, Gemini, that sort of thing is, we heard again in the antitrust trial, internal document from Google came out from an engineer saying, we don't really understand the content of pages. That's a paraphrase, but that's a sort of gap in their algorithmic strength, is really understanding, reading a page the same way a human being would, right? And I think one of the many quantum leaps forward that Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever, fill in the blank, offer is they are much better at reading, quote unquote, and digesting page content than Google's historic sort of quote unquote dumb crawlers. Google's an amazing company and they've built a terrific search engine. So that is not intended to be sort of denigration towards them, but just highlighting the fact that yes, this new model of understanding content really is much better than Google's old model was. And that's actually one of the reasons I think I would probably not invest in schema quite as heavily, is because the whole point of Gemini and Bard and ChatGPT and everything else is they can understand a page just by what's on it. They don't need any special markup, right, to understand that. Probably things like headings and call outs and that sort of stuff is going to help them. But guess what? You should already have been doing that stuff for user experience purposes, rationale. Even if Bard or no, I got to stop saying Bard, Gemini, ChatGPT, even if those tools didn't exist, right? And so I think that that's really what I'm advising is think about the taxonomy of your content. Think about how you can structure your content in a way that makes it really easy for these kinds of tools to understand, both what's on the page and how the pages fit together. That is absolutely something that I think will serve you well in the future. The other thing I would say is if I'm a local business, or even if I'm a national brand with multiple locations, I'm probably not all that concerned about the impact of SGE, because at the end of the day, even if people are doing a bunch of research and they're getting a bunch of suggested products or new yoga exercises that they should be doing, or whatever it is, right? Whatever that informational query is, at the end of the day, they're still going to probably have to go and buy that product or subscribe to that service or visit that yoga studio or whatever, right? And so Google is still, and ChatGPT as well, any of these other competitors, they're still going to have to return local businesses for the more commercial, transactional, localized queries, which Google has been showing pack results and local business websites for 4 years, since the Venice update in 2012. So I don't think, I mean, yes, the user interface will change. I think it's going to be at least a couple of years before it changes significantly. I think that SGE is still very much in beta, still plenty of hallucinations. I do not think it's ready for prime time. But clearly something in this direction is going to come out. And when it does, I still think we're going to see local businesses rewarded with positions for localized transactional queries. If I'm a publisher that's relying on a bunch of informational query traffic, yeah, I'm panicking right now. I don't have an answer for that. I would say, hang on for dear life, follow really smart people in this space. I'm sure I think you do have a list of great SEO folks to follow on LinkedIn and Twitter and all these other places. But I would say just like I would still advise the same thing I mentioned earlier about great content taxonomy, really great page structure, all of those kinds of things. But like, I don't know how long the Google fire hose is going to continue for informational queries, for sure.
Yeah. And all the things that you just said would be the tenets of good marketing and having well-structured websites that are, indexable and indexed, etc., etc. So, most people haven't even had a look at SGE yet. We don't know what it even looks like. And like you're saying, who knows what that's going to look like when it actually rolls out. But obviously there will be changes to the SERP, but it's traditional for us to have a breakdown when anything changes in the way that search results are served to our customers and our potential customers.
But I think you said it well. Like, I would say, like, it's too early to completely readjust your strategy, but you should already be doing a lot of the things that seem like they'll help with when SGE does fully roll out. So
another thing that we've been speaking about for ages, which is not putting all your eggs in the Google basket. We've all written about it. We've all talked about, foundational marketing strategies, like making sure that you have audiences outside of Google, having email lists, all of those things. Make sure you're doing all those things because you know what the SERP's going to look like or what's going to happen in the next few years. If anyone wants to drill a bit further into some of the topics that we've been talking about, is there anything that you would recommend that they listen to or watch or go away and learn from?
Sure. So we publish a lot of content at nearmedia.co. So Greg Sterling writes, and Greg Sterling and Mike Blumenthal both write a pretty frequent newsletter. I am not a newsletter author, though I believe strongly in their power. It's not part of my duties at Near Media. And we also have a weekly podcast called the Near Memo, and that's really where we take these deeper dives into particular topics, a lot fairly similar actually to what you and I have just done today. You can follow Near Media on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn. You can also follow Near Media on X, although I am no longer on X in an active way. And that's really the best place to go. I would just want to put in a quick plug, if I might. We've just released a couple of weeks ago some really interesting consumer research, especially for folks listening in the European Union. We have asked 100 Irish searchers to look for a restaurant and sort of aggregated and analyzed how they interacted with the SERP and what got most of those interactions. To sort of cut right to the punchline, the new Places Sites modules that Google's introduced and the Places chips at the top of the SERP that Google's introduced in response to the DMA, not getting a lot of engagement. Even when they show up, they were below the fold about 40% of the time. And so basically it's, carry on as you were before. The new Places Sites stuff is not really having much of an impact. So I would say, especially if you're in the EU, I think that would be a really interesting piece of research for you to check out. It's on our analysis tab on nearmedia.co.
So all that remains to say is a big thank you to you, David, for coming along today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Really appreciate the chance to be here. And it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Claire. Anytime.
Oh, come again. That would be lovely. And of course, a big thank you to you, our listeners and our watchers. So I'm going to ask you to remember to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. so that you know when we have got a new episode coming. And if you have enjoyed listening to Adventures in Local Marketing, which I very much hope you have, then please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. Share it with a friend that you think might like it. Listen to it with a friend, make an evening of it. Why not? It really makes a difference and helps us to come up with even more valuable content for you. So we will see you next time on Adventures in Local Marketing, because I am looking forward to it already. Thank you.